At the time of writing this, in March 2023, veganism is the fastest growing social justice movement on the planet. Whilst the numbers are the highest they've ever been at any point since the formation back in 1944, you could also argue that the numbers of those being exploited are also at their highest ever too. There is a growing concern that the original philosophy may be slowly being diluted, if not completely lost, in order to make way for a new one which is far more welfarist in nature, where abolition is replaced with the reduction of suffering and improving the lives of those who will still only exist to be used or taken from. The idea of this short film is to dive back to the roots of the philosophy and hopefully provide some education, re-education, or simply some inspiration as a collective to once again stand for veganism in the way that was always intended. To re-establish that there is no right way to do the wrong thing, there is no kind or better way to exploit, and improving the environment, enrichment, or quality of life does nothing at all to remove the fundamental wrong, and that is the violation of their rights. This is a brief interjection to clear up one of the most common responses to this video that I've had. The slides that are featured in the introduction and the slides which follow for the remainder of the film are intentionally fast-paced or cropped specifically. This was for two reasons. Firstly, I was always mindful of time, and with a lot to try and cover, I always wanted the film to try and stay under 30 minutes if possible. And secondly, I want you to go and read or seek these things for yourself. You would never get the full picture from a cropped snippet or one page of 10 anyway, and I've now created a page with all the sources for this film and then some, so you can access all this information for yourselves with ease. Whilst the Vegan Society may have been established 79 years ago this winter, the idea and ethics which encompass veganism have obviously been around for much longer. There's plenty of evidence of people choosing to abstain from using animal products which can be tracked back some 2,000 years ago at least. The Greek philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras, for example, was an undisputed vegetarian. He viewed vegetarianism as a key factor in the peaceful coexistence of people and nature. He held the view that slaughtering animals brutalised the human soul. In the same era, or a little bit after, you had Buddha discussing the ideas of peace and promoting a vegetarian diet within his growing number of followers, and vegetarianism has always been a central part of Buddhism, which enshrines compassion to all living creatures. I No Longer Steal from Nature by Al-Mari was written around 1000 AD, which not only abstains from eating or consuming all animal products, it even talks about injustice. Leonardo da Vinci in the 1400s was utterly repulsed by the slaughter of animals and openly refused to partake or be around the eating of flesh. The 17th century philosopher John Locke voiced arguments openly about how animals were intelligent creatures, capable of thoughts and feelings, and even raised moral objections to how animals were used and treated. In 1806, Dr. William Lamb and Percy Shelley were amongst the very first to publicly object to both eggs and dairy on ethical grounds, and by the late 1800s, vegetarian restaurants had even started to become popular in London, with other cities joining the suit by the turn of the century. This brings us back nicely to the foundation of the Vegan Society, which is the oldest recognised vegan organisation in the world and was founded in the United Kingdom by pioneers Donald Watson and Sally, otherwise known as Elsie Strigley, who called on non-dairy vegetarian allies to organise in 1944.
One interesting part of the history of the vegan social movement is the fact that the people who formed it and in the end ran it had no idea that that was going to happen, that that was going to be their fate. They simply wanted to have a vegan enclave as such within the vegetarian movement, but the vegetarians said no, and that was a good thing in the end. The vegetarians said to the vegans, no, you go and do your own thing, and so that's what happened in 1944.
Donald, his wife Dorothy, Elsie, Faye and her husband George Henderson and others would in November of 44 pave the way for everything that was to come and for what we know today as veganism, including of course the very word vegan, coined from the first three and the last two letters of the word vegetarian.
Now their first job was to prove that a 100% plant diet was satisfactory. because that was against the medical orthodoxy of the time. In fact, their doctors and their vegetarian friends all believed that they were going to die.
But what were those core ideas that inspired the movement's creation? Were they based on those of rights or welfare? Let's find out together. I wanted to take this moment to reiterate something I don't think that many are aware of, and certainly I hadn't fully realised until I started researching this film. The entire philosophy was born off the back of 2 world wars, one of which was very much still ongoing at the time of the foundation, and the idea of peace and justice and freedom were all inspired by the exact opposite which each of those had witnessed envelop them all. Donald Watson for certain lost some of those closest to him during this time, and it's safe to say that all of the founding members will have been deeply affected by the Great Depression, oppression and hopelessness, not to mention the constant threat of losing their own lives. It took not only strength and courage, but also a deep level of respect and empathy towards others. At a time when it would have been so easy to be selfish, they instead wanted to be selfless, and this all well before the end of the conflict, and especially before the 2 atrocities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The reason that I wanted to make sure this was brought to the attention of everyone is because it completely goes against that modern day consensus that veganism is just a diet, when in the reality it was always about the direct opposition of violence, the opposition of injustice, the opposition of oppression. It was always a philosophy of peace, justice and freedom for all.
In an interesting history of the movement when it was 70 years old, Dr. Samantha Calvert points out that one of the pioneers, Leslie Cross, in 1949, said that, hang on a second, we don't have a philosophy of veganism. We don't have a very good definition of veganism. The vegan diet was defined, but not veganism. So that's what they set out to do from then on until around about 1954. However, even before that, there were some attempts. For example, this is Donald Watson from 1945. He's the best known of the co-founders of the vegan social movement. And he said that veganism was the opposition of the exploitation of sentient life. Leslie Cross, though, was really the person whose writings established the evolution of vegan philosophy. What he did really was establish what you could call the focus and the scope of veganism. The focus is always on our relationships with other animals, but the focus is only part of veganism. The scope is much wider and concerned environmental issues, and in particular issues about human evolution. They said that humanity had got into a new low and veganism was kind of key to get it out. The language could be a bit flowery at times, but the strong underlining message was always that the liberation of other animals was our own liberation, that the benefits to humanity from veganism would be absolutely huge.
And if we can solve this problem of animal exploitation and spread veganism, we should also solve the problems of war, of poverty, and all the other things that has caused immense suffering to people and animals through the ages.
The movements for human, earth, animal liberation. When we start to put these movements together, we get what I call total liberation. When we think in terms of total liberation rather than single issue, we start thinking in a very different and much more profound way.
In 2 separate essays in 1951, Cross made it crystal clear that veganism was about animal liberation rather than animal welfare. He was very strong on this point.
If you look at the distinction between use and treatment, the animal welfare position is use is okay if treatment is acceptable. The animal rights position is that use is not acceptable, however humane the treatment may be.
The idea of humane slaughter is like an oxymoron to me. It's like military intelligence, you know. I mean, the 2 ideas don't go together very well. But even if there was, by some wild invention, some way of killing animals without causing them pain, still wouldn't justify killing them.
The vegan pioneers were liberators rather than reformists, although they did talk about reform as a type of social transformation sometimes. And more than anything else, they were, as they still are, abolitionist. Veganism is animal liberation, and veganism is abolitionist.
Bans aren't automatically abolitionist. Yes, a ban abolishes something. However, if it leaves the animals in question within a situation of exploitation, such as food industry, enslavement, and slaughter, it isn't abolitionist in the sense of being anti-slavery.
Just as in the 19th century, there was a real schism between abolitionists of slavery and the people who wanted to make slavery more humane. Those people were at odds with each other because the abolitionists said, look, I'm not interested in making an unjust institution more humane. I'm interested in abolishing the institution.
Remember, the abolitionists did not ask, beat the slaves 3 times a week instead of 5. They did not ask, give them better bedding and more food. They said, end the slavery altogether.
In a very powerful essay that was written in 1954 called The Surge of Freedom, Leslie Cross spoke about the changes that a vegan revolution would bring.
It seems clear to me that the age of predatory ban is coming to an end. He has destroyed not only the animals, but the whole planet and himself too. He cannot go on.
Some of those changes are obvious, he said. Obviously, we would stop eating other animals, vivisect them, we wouldn't hunt and that kind of stuff. And then he said that there were some of the changes which are not so obvious. It's the benefits to humanity which fall into this category. Essentially, a vegan world would be transformative for the benefit of all. Veganism is, after all, a justice for all philosophy.
Is it rational, impartial, scientifically informed? Does it stand for peace and against injustice? To all these questions, the answer is an unqualified yes.
Now here's another articulation of vegan values from the 1960s from Eva Batt, and another one again from the 1980s or the 1990s, depending on which edition of this book is being cited. But overall, Matthew Cole, the sociologist, sums up things very well indeed, and he did this in 2014. He said that the vegan aim or object combines compassionate non-exploitation of other animals with an emancipated vegan self and a more compassionate human society. Vegan ethics from the beginning, says Cole, was directed towards these interconnected goals of transforming human beings and transforming human society. Both, he said, flowed from the foundational reconfiguration of human, non-human animal relations.
The important idea for the purposes of the animal rights movement is the idea of what philosophers call a negative right. This is a right of non-interference, non-invasion, non-harm. And what the animal rights people are really trying to do, what we're trying to say, is that the arguments are in place, they're there, they're compelling, they're persuasive, that make the case that these rights extend to other animals.
And we will not be satisfied until we've gotten every animal out of every cage.
So there we have it, the exciting and somewhat chaotic, you might say, beginnings of the vegan social movement and then the evolution of vegan philosophy as we know it now.
It should now be well established when, how, who by, and most importantly why the movement was founded, and the simple concepts and values which it was based upon. There would have been both encouragement but some level of expectation for us to evolve, certainly not any kind of compromise or worse still regression, and those original values were never intended to be diluted or reduced. The idea of campaigning for better standards and more efficient forms of exploitation in the likes of welfare groups and legislation is essentially not only a complete lack of respect for our foundations, but more importantly for the victims that those foundations were set up to liberate, not continue to use in a nicer environment. Yet worryingly, that seems to be an ever-growing view within the collective. Simply through the use of their language they use or the media they share, this reducitarian paradigm is sweeping in. Which brings us on to the penultimate section of this film. How did we get here?
The question I ask myself is, if I can live in a way that reduces animal suffering, why wouldn't I?
Asking others to be as vegan as possible is also beneficial because it asks for reduction, which people are more receptive to than they are to full veganism.
It's a relatively young movement. It's about food. To think that every use is necessarily abuse is, I think, a mistake. I mean, there can be, like I said, a give and take, and that is what I call a symbiosis. Living together, humans and animals, the problem is, of course, they cannot give consent.
We want to create a world which is more ethical and reduces animal suffering as far as is possible.
I use the phrasing reduce suffering, and I guess that is the principle I align with more.
You started getting this distinction, this debate between animal rights and animal welfare.
I think that people are so concerned about suffering that they tend to lead activism into a welfare position.
The people who were the rights people were by and large vegans. They got it. They understood that if animals have rights, if they have a right not to be treated as our commodities, well, then that logically implies you can't eat them, you can't wear them, you can't use them for various purposes. And so the rights people got that, by and large. The welfare people didn't.
But can we please stop reducing veganism to a welfare movement where all we talk about is animal cruelty? We're not campaigning for comfier cages, and every time you talk about just cruelty, that's where people's heads go. They want to try and find a solution for it rather than actually respecting the rights that they're violating.
And a welfare approach, which talks about suffering and cruelty, essentially a kind of don't be cruel message, whereas the rights message is stronger. It's do not violate rights. Makes the claim that other animals are rights bearers and that when we use them, that's a rights violation.
We could say, well, what's the difference? Because, if you're working to reduce suffering, that's going to lead to abolition. Let me tell you, there is no historical evidence, absolutely none, that by regulating animal exploitation, it will lead to the abolition of anything. If anything, the empirical evidence is to the contrary. The more you tidy up these unjust institutions, the more comfortable you make people feel about exploiting animals.
If you look at all the animal groups that still sell books, for example, you'll be hard-pressed to find a Tom Reagan book, and you won't find the case for animal rights. So the fundamental, groundbreaking statement of rights-based animal rights is not part of our movement. Peter Singer's Animal Liberation is, and that's a non-rights book. Singer says quite openly that he's not an animal rightist and that he regrets framing animal liberation in terms of rights.
Although people very frequently describe me as an animal rights advocate, as you just did, and that's fine from the point of view of taking a political stance. People will know what side I'm on, where I am. Philosophically, I'm not an animal rights advocate.
If you order a meal at a restaurant and it comes with cheese on top or something, and you've got the choice between sending it back and saying, give me what I asked for, or just kind of shrugging your shoulders and eating it, it might be best to just shrug your shoulders and eat it, because in front of your friends, you don't want to make it seem like a difficult thing to do. Is that something that you've said in the
Yeah,
past?
it probably is something that I've said, yes, and that is consistent with the kinds of things that I think about.
So you would just eat the cheese?
In that case, yes.
I can't say with any confidence that it's wrong to bring animals into existence, give them good lives, and then kill them in a way that causes them no suffering. And that's what I mean by humanely killed, by the way, and I think that can happen. Again, it doesn't happen standardly at commercial slaughterhouses, but it can happen.
Yes. He makes it very clear he doesn't think it's animal use per se that is problematic. What Peter says in Animal Liberation is it's the treatment of animals that's problematic. I think it is terrible that someone who is referred to as the father of the animal rights movement is saying that it's a morally defensible position to eat animals that have been, quote, humanely, end quote, raised or slaughtered. I think that's nonsense.
Whilst there are a number of digs at Peter Singer in this film, I would like to make the point that in his defence, he has always been consistent with his views. He's always maintained and in his own way defended his position, and the problem isn't really him. It's everyone else who misinterprets, misrepresents, or even flat out lies about his work, what it says, or what he stands for. I actually get the impression he's fed up with having a philosophy he fundamentally disagrees with thrust upon him, time and time again, year after year. There's only so many times you can declare your position to have it projected as the opposite, so maybe you should stop doing it, eh Ingrid? I'm sure many of you listening to this have yourselves watched, recommended to others, linked or handed out materials which promote films like Dominion and Earthlings, among others, not to mention the sharing of graphic footage and the like on your various social media accounts. Maybe you've even taken part in street activism where you've shown this footage to the public on screen strapped to your chest or at some public event. We are all aware of how moving and effective these films can be for the not yet vegans to watch, to bring that shock and discomfort factor that often invokes a reaction and then a conversation, and usually most of the time that reaction is sympathetic, right? Let's be perfectly honest here, almost everyone, everywhere is against unnecessary suffering. For the most part, we all share the same values and morals, they're just either misguided or misdirected by many due to outside influences.
We get this oppressive mindset from our parents, our environment, or the media. That discrimination is a learned behavior applies to any form of oppression. Also to speciesism. What is speciesism, you ask? Speciesism is the moral discrimination of individuals based on their species.
Yet at base level, the vast majority would vote for no suffering over some suffering. Of course they would.
Although we supposedly prohibit the infliction on animals of unnecessary suffering, we do not ask whether particular animal uses are necessary, even though most of the suffering that we impose on animals cannot be characterized as necessary in any meaningful sense.
There's something that we use animals for that's important, for example, pain experiments, the pain happens to be important, then that takes precedence. What the scientists or whatever the enterprise is, the Animal Welfare Act is involved with, the enterprise has to come first, and that makes sense.
This brings me back to one of the realizations that inspired this film. All of that footage, all of those films, it only ever takes people to one place: treatment. It makes them see how bad, how tragic and how deplorable the situation is, without ever addressing the fundamental issue. It highlights the violence, the barbarity, the torture and pain, and nothing at all about how if none of those things happened and we were showing content, well looked after, healthy and well enriched animals instead, absolutely nothing at all would change about the fundamental wrong.
Even if they remain property, we could treat them better, but we don't. And we have had animal welfare laws for 200 years, and we are exploiting more animals in more horrific ways than at any point in human history.
This then extends into the language that we use. Cruelty, suffering, abuse, these take precedent over exploitation, use or rights violations, simply because they appear more hard-hitting. When the truth is, every single time you use one without backing it up with the why, you only further dilute the cause, albeit unintentionally.
When you do get into the mainstream media, the journalists conflate the whole thing and talk about these activists are trying to end animal cruelty. It's like, no, yeah, we want to stop the bloody cruelty, but fundamentally we want to stop the use completely. We want these other individuals' rights to be respected, and we want justice.
Now, I'm sure most of you listening are fully aware of how much the media like to twist and sensationalise any story. It's basically their job to grab attention. This can be increased significantly when talking to one of the vitriolic anti-vegans who thrive on trapdoor-style tactics or simply out-shouting their guest in order to spew out whatever rhetoric they were always going to vocalise, regardless of who or whatever their opponent tried to say. But what about the others? Those sat on the fence, those without a view, or even those willing to engage? Where does their idea of veganism come from? Where do they learn which language to use when communicating with us or others? Well, sadly, they get it from us. They reread previous interactions or written articles about the subject, and that becomes their research, simply because of an initial mistake that was never corrected down to how we convey the message day to day. This language they use, it's the same language that we are using, and that should bring it to the forefront of our attention just how important this is to correct going forward.
Come on, this is one of the great sporting events in British cultural life. How are you going to disrupt it, and why are you going to disrupt it?
So horse racing is wrong, and we can do so much better than using animals for fun or food.
Dean Stousel, Ben says horse racing is wrong and cruel. Is he right?
No, you didn't say that, right? No. So this is the problem, that you've got the journalists who, because of years and years of us talking about cruelty and stuff, they just naturally think that that's the language that we're going to use.
We've already got the walls of confirmation bias and prejudice to try and break through, and we already have to accept that some level of toning down will always happen. So our message has to be as strong as possible. If our words are already diluted before they're further watered down and repeated by the media, what's even really left of the original message anyway? I felt the need for another interjection here because I wanted to make it quite clear that I am not telling anyone to stop using these words. I don't think that any words should be banned per se, just that they need to be backed up. They need to be the entry point to a conversation that then once you've got someone through the door, you explain that the issue is actually use, not treatment. Some may disagree and say that you can't use without cruelty or abuse. Whilst I would concede that for the most part this is the case, there are always those exceptions where it is not, and because of those it's always best in my opinion to take any loopholes out the equation. Let's look at it this way. If there were to be a survey done where the question was asked simply, are you against animal cruelty, the vast majority would say yes. I mean, it's exactly the mantra that say the RSPCA or any other welfare organisation promote. The problem lies where the consumers understand that something has to happen for an animal to get from living to a burger or a jacket, for example, even if they ignore the in-between. So anything that goes into that process often doesn't factor in as cruel or abusive, not unless it's excessive, the environment is extremely poor, or there's some other issue which has been raised which should often usually violate the Animal Welfare Act anyway. This gets even more difficult when speaking with farmers or anyone culturally normalised to using animals in a particular way. As for them, even more so, cruelty and abuse are things that they don't do. They'll even actively argue against this, defending their use. And again, using the idea of a survey, if these people were asked to pass judgment on another who was intentionally mistreating, say, a cow by kicking them, for example, the vast majority would agree that this was cruel and condemn it, stating that they don't do that, therefore they're not the same. Their definition or interpretation of these words are often very different to our own, so I feel it's much better for us to meet them using theirs than to try and change their mind about how they use certain words almost daily. If they don't think anything they do is abusive, for example, then remind them that we are against the use, not the treatment, so even if we give them the benefit of the doubt, it doesn't change the wrong that we actually oppose. Just something to think about going forward.
We rush in, we promote some welfarist solution that dissipates, reduces the demand for abolition.
Not being cruel is not enough. Being kind is not enough. We are not here to beg for mercy or make a plea for pity. We are here to demand justice for our fellow animals.
So the question is, what do we do now?
Veganism is the single most important thing that one can do today.
As advocates for the other animals, we need to send a strong, clear, abolitionist message.
I say without hesitation that I think accelerating a trend to veganism is the most important thing we can do today. We live at momentous times, at what could be a terrific turning point, and even now.
According to some, vegan education has already been tried and it doesn't work, but this is a totally false premise, and said people can never pinpoint a time where education about veganism was ever given a proper chance to begin with, let alone to say it doesn't work. With the term only being around for the last 80 years or so, and in comparison to the 200 plus years of animal welfare legislation and over double that of single issue and pressure campaigns that we know of, it's much more documented and accurate to state that it is in fact those which do not work, and so surely it has to be time for us to look at education.
We're talking about this century. We do get some claims in the movement that we've been doing vegan education and veganism has been the thing for decades and decades and decades, and it's been a failure. That is not true. In some senses, in terms of veganism being so central as it is now, it's only just beginning.
You know, I mean, imagine if you were somebody who was an abolitionist of slavery and you owned slaves. It doesn't make any sense. If you are in fact an abolitionist, then apply the principle of abolition to your own life. You know, as Gandhi would say, just say no. Don't participate in it.
Veganism is a way of thinking. It's a way of respecting other beings, humans and non-humans alike.
1970, I coined the term speciesism to describe the prejudice against the other species and to draw the analogy with other prejudices like racism and sexism. All species are related biologically and through evolution. And instead of treating the other species like objects, we should be treating them as our evolutionary cousins. So it doesn't matter what species you're from, any more than it matters what race or gender you're from. We should all have the same sort of respect, morally speaking.
People should want to live in a world where respect becomes the keynote.
When we look at slavery in America, when you could buy and sell and beat with impunity, people of African descent. Unthinkable today. When women couldn't divorce or own property or get an education or vote. Unthinkable today.
Any revolution that liberates one species on the back of millions of others is no revolution at all. That is not revolutionary change. That's just more of the same. That's just changing the regime, the humanist speciesist regime. And profound change eludes us.
I think it's the question, do humans always have to act like this? Do we always have to be aggressive? Do we always have to be bullies? As long as we're bullies to other animals, we'll be bullies to each other. As long as we're bullies to each other, we'll be bullies to other animals, and there's really no difference between the two.
But the amount of progress animal rights advocates have made is minuscule in terms of the challenges we face. All we've done is to pour the footer for the foundation of an edifice. Or maybe we haven't even done that. Maybe all we've done is dug the footer, for the foundation of an edifice. But the great work that remains to be done is the work that will really bring about empty cages, true animal liberation.
Education is labor intensive, it is grueling, it is a pain in the neck, but it's the only way we are going to ever succeed. And by we, I mean those people who believe that it's the abolition and not the regulation. Those of us who are interested in getting rid of non-human slavery rather than making it more humane.
If you're not vegan, become vegan. If you're vegan, but you're not an activist, become an activist, or be willing to be an activist. And if you're an activist and you're not an organizer, then become an organizer. That's the key to achieving animal liberation. We need active local groups, and we need people who will organize those groups. If you don't have the organizers, you won't have the groups. You won't.
The animal rights movement is the most important, dynamic, and powerful movement on the planet right now. If you look at all the human rights movements, where are they? Where's the feminist movement? Where's the civil rights movement? Where's the anti-war movement? They're completely quiescent. They've been completely marginalized. They're ineffective. They're non-existent. But if you ask, where is the animal rights movement? They're everywhere.
Our first obligation to the animals and to the earth is to stay in the movement, to keep making a contribution in our several ways, in our separate ways. The enemy wins if we go out the door.
Think about what you can do to carry out, to organise and to stimulate vegan outreach in your own area. Because we need outreach in every city, we need it in every town and even every village, right down at grassroots level, educating people as often as possible and as much as possible.
In Greece, there are not any large animal rights organizations. Everything is done by the grassroots, from the outreach events to direct action, from the conferences to festivals. It's from the people and for the people, because the claims making, the strategies, the tactics, the narratives are defined only by the desire to correct injustice and stop oppression and liberate oneself and others. So there is no other agenda. The grassroots are not afraid to go against the status quo, and that's where their power lies.
And we have a lot more vegans now than we used to have, but so few of those vegans are active. They're just kind of passive vegans that eat a vegan diet, and it's all about what they don't do. I don't eat animal products. I'm not going to go to the animal circus. I'm not going to go to the zoo. I'm not going to buy from a charity shop that funds vivisection. And all that's good, not doing things, but it's not enough. There has to be an active element. We have to actively go out there and promote veganism and change other people.
Because the organisations become corporatised, their aim and their kind of strategies are to attract more donors, to keep the machine ticking over, to keep it running. And so therefore they do have to dilute the message. With grassroots, there isn't that limitation. We can be more radical. We are there to be radical. We are there to swim against the tide and talk against the status quo. And
that idea that you can liberate one group by objectifying another, it sometimes is used by large organizations.
We have to abolish speciesism. We have to abolish racism. We have to abolish sexism, homophobia, ableism, and capitalism. Cannot abolish speciesism without abolishing capitalism.
If we really want to achieve animal liberation in any widespread way, we have to abolish capitalism because it's a system based on greed. So it drives consumption, it will drive industrialization, it will drive all these things that harm the environment and therefore harm animals that live within the environment.
So, welcome to progress. Progress has been defined to the extent to which we can control and exploit animals, the environment, and pre-modern peoples.
Action should come from the community because every community is different, has different needs, and the message must be tailored to fit these needs. Putting people on pedestals is so disempowering, and I don't see how we can liberate ourselves or others by preserving hierarchies.
Actually, often the high profile figures in a movement get a lot of the, the praise, and they're in the public eye and people remember them and talk about them and they are put on pedestals. But actually a lot of the work that is done, the real hard work that creates the change and brings about the change, is the stuff that's going on in the background. And the people who are not recognized, the people who are not high profile, that are doing the real, boots on the ground work actually. And that's where real change is happening.
Now, as a preface for what I'm about to say, let me be clear that I'm not attacking nor condemning anyone. I'm simply making observations. With that in mind, we do have to acknowledge the fact that there are large organisations and groups that already exist within the movement with vast abundances of wealth and staffing that could be doing far more than what they are. But their hands are financially, legally or narcissistically tied because their careers are more important than the cause. And this sadly also extends into certain influencers and big name activists too. Their direction becomes influenced or outright controlled by the hands that supply them. How often do you hear any of these people encourage you to do your own thing, as opposed to simply supporting them doing theirs? I appreciate that for many, they feel as though they are unable to be active themselves due to various life limitations, and that's why they support others. That is their activism. I get that, I do, honestly. I'm just here to remind you that there are so many things that you could do yourself that would not only empower you, but yet then you can encourage others to do exactly the same thing. This is how the movement will really spread and grow. This can be anything from leafleting to designing those leaflets, starting a blog or a website, making or updating memes on social media posts, even through the use of a pseudonym to protect your identity if needs be, but at least you are doing it. There are dozens of things that you can do without ever leaving your house, and they don't cost you a penny.
I kind of promote people doing really, really simple things to the extent of just having leaflets on them and leave them in public places, on public transport, in libraries, in waiting rooms and stuff like that. It's something everyone can do.
My name's Graham, and along with my wife Georgina, we are the founders of Vegan, a vegan education group and activist network. We initially set this group up in March 2023 after looking to get more active in our communities, and we were looking for any sort of group, animal rights based or abolition, to get involved with. Since COVID in Ireland and the lifting of the restrictions, all the activism groups regarding grassroots vegan education, abolition, animal rights had appeared to have ceased, and we decided to create our own. A lot of people think you need huge backing and a lot of people to get organised and get active. It couldn't be further from the truth. Really, you need, a table, poster or two. If you can hand out some leaflets or have some information cards or sheets, it's always great. But ultimately, all you need is yourself and some passion and the courage to talk to people.
With grassroots activism, individuals from within the community get to speak and have a voice and are representatives of that community. And of course, we all live in communities and we share those communities with other humans, but also with other animals. And I feel that it's important to bring that aspect in, that actually other animals are part of our communities. We're already in relations with other animals. We might not think we are. Everything we do is in relation to other animals. And I think we can speak to that from within communities from a grassroots point of view.
As you probably noticed from this video, I'm quite introvert and shy, but the only way we can ever reach liberation and abolition is by coming outside of our comfort zones and, just getting active. So in the space of a month, we now have a table, we have a couple of pull-up banners, we have posters, leaflets, all created ourselves. And we probably have about 10 to 15 people now every Sunday out on the streets in Dublin city centre. on the space of, little to no time.
We have to acknowledge, you have that belief, I have this belief, ultimately we're on the same team. Let's work together despite not sharing all of the same beliefs together. So can vegans become a great tribe together? I hope so.
And we can get enough vegan education often enough, I believe, that we can achieve animal liberation.
As we conclude this short film, I can only hope we are reminded of our roots as an abolitionist rights-based movement that was founded at a time where all around was violence, suppression, injustice and despair, and yet they still chose peace. Veganism has never been about settling for or compromising with oppression. We have always sought to challenge the exploitation of others for any purposes and have always advocated for their liberation. Throughout history, passionate individuals have dedicated their lives to demanding for rights to be acknowledged and for borderless social justice. They have written books, given speeches, organised protests, events, films, and fought tirelessly to raise awareness about the inherent value and rights of all sentient life. Their dedication and unwavering commitment to the abolitionist approach have paved the way for the progress that we do actually see today. As vegans, we have a responsibility to be self-aware of where we apply our time, energy, and vitally our money. We cannot just promote veganism, but we must also embody it in all aspects of our lives, and that includes the way we speak about it. If you yourself wouldn't be satisfied with having the cruelty removed and yet remaining enslaved, then don't campaign for cruelty-free for them, advocate for abolition. Let us be mindful of the messages we share, the information we spread around, and the way we talk about the vegan message. Our words and actions have the power to inspire change, to raise awareness, and probably most importantly, it is our message which is repeated by those not yet vegan, by those in the press, in the media, in government, in all the places we wish to ripen up and influence change. Let us continue to work on ourselves just as much as we do on anyone else. Let's make sure we both honour and evolve the original philosophy, and together we can make a difference and be a force for positive change. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Let us continue to spread the message of justice, peace and liberation for all, and strive for a future based on respecting animal rights, not polishing up human wrongs.
One final brief interjection from me to say an enormous thank you to all the help in making this film, from all of the contributors to just those who showed me support throughout, especially when it came to the help I received in order to complete this director's cut and to progress forward making more films. This is all only possible because of you. On the note of completion though, this is likely to be the very last edit of this particular movie. Whilst I still absolutely welcome feedback and criticism, any responses or amendments now will be made in other planned projects, with the idea of making shorter, more concise films about some of the individual issues mentioned within this one, such as an expansion on the history, grassroots activism, single-issue campaigns and language, to name just a few ideas that I'm already bouncing around, and this is something certainly that I would like to do more of going forward. I really hope after watching through this documentary at the very least it has made you think. Don't ever forget just how much power each of us hold to make a difference. If we don't ever try to change something, we won't ever change anything. It all begins somewhere.
What history teaches us is that a few good people who are determined and who are persistent, who don't give up, can change the world. So what we have to believe as activists is that we're not going to do this tomorrow. The wall of oppression has to be taken apart a brick at a time. When we get a critical mass of people, change will occur. That's how I go to sleep at night. That's how I get up the next morning.